So, hello, Jim. How are you doing today?
We're doing great, Fernanda. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
here.
I'm very excited to have you here, Jim. I'm very excited. And this is the very first interview I have with a recruiter. So that's kind of awesome. And I'm very glad you're the first person to do it. I'm very happy to be you.
Yep, and I'm very happy to be here. It's great to share information. I think today, you chose a great topic in that, talking about STEM, and I will throw a little bit about Hope College in there, but that's not the thrust of the presentation. The main idea is, studying STEM and what that means. But I'm also kind of mixing in a little bit of the college search process and what's important to what students should think about that might be important in the process of selecting that school.
Yes, that sounds perfect. That sounds absolutely perfect.
Good. So what I'll do then is I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and we'll go to a PowerPoint, and feel free to, ask questions at any point, and then we can also talk a little bit at the end if you want. So let's do that. I'm going to share this, and we're going to move to presentation mode.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, my name is Jim Crawley. I'm the Director of Global Recruitment at Hope College, and we're located in the west side of Michigan. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But let's go on and talk about the discussion points that we want to go through in this presentation. That would be, a little bit on why study in the U.S. Not a lot, but just touch upon that. And then a little bit more on choosing a STEM major. What does that mean exactly? And then we also want to touch upon deciding where to study, because there are so many options in the U.S. and it can be very confusing, very even frustrating at times to make that decision. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of where. And then also I want to close with a bit about the admissions process, because there are so many colleges and universities in the U.S., the admission process can vary a little bit. So we want to kind of go over what that looks like, where some differences might be between schools, and then we can kind of take it from there. How's that sound, Fernanda?
Sounds great. That's perfect.
Super. So looking at why study in the U.S. So I think there are probably as many reasons as there are people as to why to study in the U.S., because everybody kind of has their own, it's their own journey, their own path, and their own reasons. And that's great. That's the way it should be. We're not like a bunch of lemmings jumping off a cliff. I think we're all making our individual decisions and our reasons for doing so. But in saying that, the degrees in the U.S. are recognized globally. I think that you want to make sure, obviously, that you're attending a school that is accredited, and knowing that it's in the U.S. we have regional accreditation, not national. So if you're looking for a school that's nationally accredited, you simply won't find that, because other than maybe some trade schools that might have some technical national accreditation, or individual academic programs can have national accreditation, like Hope has an engineering program that's ABET accredited. But generally speaking, you're looking for a school that is regionally accredited within the U.S. And that recognition does carry over globally. We do have top-ranked programs and institutions, and I fully realize and recognize that, all over the world, every country has its degree, the degrees are recognized and the programs are ranked, and so there's good quality everywhere. It's just a matter of you as a student deciding, what's the best place for you, what's the best choice. Academic excellence, again, I think we have excellent schools all over the world. It's just the point of figuring out, if you want to come to the U.S., which ones in the U.S. are going to make your list, which ones are going to be in your top choices. We do have options in all price ranges. So I think you can look at anything from a community college, which would tend to be cheaper, and that would be your first 2 years. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, on up to a very elite private school that would be extremely expensive. And then you've got to factor in the financial aid too. So again, some of these things we'll touch upon in the presentation, but I kind of want to bring these out in the beginning as well. But we do offer a full range of price ranges based on the type of institution that you choose in the U.S. we like, coming from a liberal arts institution myself and being a liberal arts graduate, I like to feel, or I really strongly feel, that the liberal arts does help prepare students for the job market. It does help them with communication skills. It does help them with people relation skills. It helps them to think critically as they're approaching their career, whatever it might be. And many students, because of this broad-based kind of knowledge they're getting in the liberal arts, many will not work exactly in the field that they got their degree in. And some would say, well, you know, you wasted a lot of money on a degree if you're not working on the field. But I think what you've done is you've prepared yourself to be successful really in multiple careers. I am a prime example of that. I graduated with a degree in elementary education. I've never taught. I've worked with kids in many other ways, many nonprofits and things like that. And I'm still in education. I'm just not in teaching. So I think, you know, the liberal arts does help prepare us to be successful. Whichever way we go. Internship availability. That's another reason I think that students do look to the US, is they have that ability within their degree program to do an internship. It's called curricular practical training, and that's something you need to remember right now in the process, because your international student advisor will tell you about that if they're doing their job at the college or university. And this is something that you are able to do as an international student. And I know, like at Hope College, 94% of our students do experiential learning while they're at Hope, which means they do an internship, research, or study abroad, or a combination of more than one of those. So looking for a school that does emphasize that availability to you can be very important, especially if you're going to fields. I mean, you can do an internship in any field, but I think especially business and sciences in particular seem to have a lot of internships.
And Jim, I have a question about it, since you mentioned, you said that it's the CPT, right? The curriculum practicum trainer, or something like that.
Yep, curricular practical training. Yep.
Yes, the international student, they can do it throughout their college career, or did they have to apply just when they graduate to do a CPT? How does
CPT? Yeah, but a good question. A CPT is actually done during the degree, and then at the end of a degree, there's something called optional practical training, or OPT. Mm-hmm. So CPT, the three parts of it, really, the three stipulations, things that have to happen are: one, you have to have a job offer; mm-hmm. two, it has to be related to your field of study. Mm-hmm. And three, your academic advisor has to make it a part of your program. So in other words, it has to be for credit. Okay. It has to be part of the program, part of the degree. And actually, there's a fourth, and that would be approval by the international student advisor. It does not, for CPT, curricular practical training, or the internship, it does not need to go into the immigration service for approval. That's something that can happen right at the college, as opposed to the optional practical training, which is the job after graduating. You don't have to have a job offer. You do have to apply for permission through the immigration service at the beginning of your final semester of enrollment. And it's about $450, I think, now to apply for that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, assuming you've done everything you're supposed to, you've kept a valid visa status, there's been no issues, you should get approved. And it should arrive, if you apply in a timely manner very early in your last semester, then it should arrive, the permission should arrive right about the time you graduate. And then it starts typically right after you graduate and goes for a year. Mm-hmm. If you're in a STEM program, you could then apply for an extension of up to 2 more years. So STEM majors can do up to 3 years of work after they graduate. So there's a definite advantage for the STEM majors.
Perfect. That's awesome. And because usually people ask, because I got my OPT card, but I did it in the end, but I never applied for or tried to do the internship throughout my school year, but I know a lot of people do. So that's really good that you bring that up, because students don't know about it, that they have this option, and it really helps them out, right?
Right. I think if we're doing our job from the university side, we're doing our best, and this goes into career preparation, which is kind of the next two here. Oops, I want to go back. Sorry, I went too fast on that one.
No problem.
These last two items, So career preparation and research opportunities. If we're doing our job as a U.S. institution, we are helping prepare our students for the next level. So we're helping prepare them for internships while they're going through the program, but then also helping prepare them for the job field or graduate school. And the way we prepare them is not just through the academics and the interaction with faculty members. That's all very valuable. Obviously, that's why you're there, but also through the internships and research. Those types of opportunities are building a resume, building experience for the student to take with them into the next level, and building their confidence too. Because if a student is going into a job interview, they can confidently say, you know, I did this in my internship, or I did this in my research, and this is what I discovered, and this is what I learned from it. And I think being able to articulate those things in a job interview or a graduate school interview is very influential.
Yes.
So many times employers especially will look for somebody with experience. And if you weren't able to get any of these experiences as a college student, you're at a disadvantage against others who have. So I feel that our educational system does provide areas of specialization and research that can be very helpful, especially if you're at a small private school. I think you really get a chance to do a lot of hands-on work that, not to say that's not available at a big school, because it is, but there tends to be more competition at the big school, and not only with your peers, but also with the graduate students who are there, who are trying to do the same type of thing. And really for graduate study, that's what it's all about, is doing research. So if there's facilities like in the sciences, if they can have designated facilities for undergrad at a big school, then I think that's great. If not, if everybody's using the same facilities, I think you've got competition there, with the grad school. So
yes.
So deciding what to study. Now, I think this is a multi-pronged or multi-step process as well. So first of all is your academic preparation as a high school student. So, if you're in your final year, then really the grades that you have and the classes you have done already up to this point, that's all we're going to see, because you're in your senior year and you're applying for admission. And so the current grades, the current classes, we won't see those till after you've already graduated and you've already decided to come. And so if you're a senior, again, then we're talking more about your preparation of your file and how it looks and your personal statement and all that stuff. But your academic preparation is pretty much done. If you're in your first or second year of secondary school, then you have the chance to some degree, to, even if it's not the selection of your classes, because maybe you're in a situation where you don't have a choice as to what you take, but you do have a choice as to how well you do. And so you control your academic future to the degree of how prepared that you are through the efforts you put into class. And so it's really important not only to take the best classes that will help prepare you for college, if you have some choice in that matter, but also to do the best you can. And if you do have a rough first year, then the objective then is to continually improve, to show progressive improvement from your first year to your third year, or even your fourth year if you're applying after you graduate. But that academic preparation, which you take, can be a part of our decision, certainly, or it is a part of our decision, but also it can affect your ability to go into certain academic areas. So if you are going into engineering, for example, or you want to, and you don't have very much physics or chemistry or sciences in general, it's going to be tough. You're going to have to go in your first year, and you might not get right into the engineering program because you don't have the appropriate science background. You'll have to take some remedial classes or some entry-level classes, not so much remedial, but entry-level, that will help catch you up with the other students. And that can just take more time that way. It takes more time. So the better prepared you are, the better you'll be once you reach the college. So then it's your individual academic interest. What is it that piques your interest? What is it that that you think either you're very good at academically, or you think you've been okay at it, but you want to learn more? You have this hunger to learn more about this area. So what is your academic interest? And combining that a little bit then with what is your professional interest? So you may know kind of what you want to do as a job, but you may not necessarily know how to get there.
Yeah.
Whereas other jobs, other fields, it's much more natural to know if you want to be a biological scientist, you're going to major in biology. There's not, that's kind of a no-brainer. But you may not know how to get to a certain career. If you want to be a epidemiologist, or something, something in the health field. How do I exactly get there in the U.S.? And what majors do I take to do that? So one quick story, there's a student who went to a small private school that I used to work at that the student was very strong, was a very strong artist. She drew pictures like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I was totally impressed. She had one of her portfolios with her, and I was really, really impressed with that. But she knew, and her parents knew, that probably being an artist was not going to be, the way she was going to make the most money. It's possible, but it was unlikely. But she was also extremely talented scientist. I mean, she had done some great things in high school in science, but she just didn't know if that's really what she wanted to do. So we got to talking to her about the possible combinations of art and science, and you don't naturally think of those kind of going together. But what happened was she did combine those two, and she ended up getting a job as a medical illustrator. So she drew the pictures for medical textbooks, and which are now obviously mostly digital, but she may very well still be doing it digitally now. But that was a way to combine her talents with her interests, and really a very lucrative career. So I think that's why we have a great system in place at the U.S. on the U.S. side of advising and working with not only your departmental advisor, your academic advisor, maybe even a pre-professional advisor if you're looking at professional school, working with those advisors and the Career Center as well to kind of lay out your plan. Remember earlier I said everybody has their own journey, and that's the way I like to think of it, is everybody is on a journey when they go to college. You have your personal journey, you have your academic journey, you might have a spiritual journey. I mean, there's all kinds of journeys you might have, but they're yours, they're nobody else's. So you define how that's going to go, but you define it with feedback from other people and with experiences that help shape that journey.
Yeah, and that's really important. Like, as you were saying, I was like throwing back to when I started also to my journey in the US, because I went to the US without knowing what I wanted to do. So which is what happens to most people here in Brazil, since we don't have the option to pick our classes during high school. So we're giving a schedule basically. So when we get out, we are very confused on like, what should we do now? Like, what do I like biology? Do I want to do something different? Like, because, I wouldn't say we're not prepared, because we do have really good bases of like our academics are good. They're just not so wide where it doesn't give us the opportunity to try stuff out before we go to a college or university. So to me, going to the US and having like almost 2 years where I could also find out what I wanted to study. And because I go in with an idea like, I might want to study international business. But in my first and second year, I switched completely to marketing, to something more creative. I even thought about getting a degree in graphic design, because I also like I have interest in the creative side of marketing. So combining all of that, I think college in the US or even a university, it gives you at least that liberty to try stuff, at least in your first year, right? To see what you like to study, at least, or have a better idea, and, in the path you want to take. And of course, the last thing you said about having someone from the college help you through that is really, really helpful. It's really what change for me was a really good thing for me, to have that guidance from a person that, from teachers, from advisors, from even the people in admissions that, helped bring us there. It made a difference, at least in my experience. So yeah, it goes along with what you were saying.
Yeah, those are all really, really good points. And you mentioned about, that first year or two. And that's where at most US colleges, unless you're going to like an art school or some other kind of technical school, but most four-year schools, almost all of them, you have this general education curriculum or liberal arts curriculum that you take in the first couple of years. And it's a grouping of classes that are from across the curriculum. Even school, now Hope College happens to be a liberal arts school, but even schools like, let's say a Michigan State University, which is a big public institution, they have general education requirements too, and they really don't vary that much from what a liberal arts college offers. It's just, there are some differences, but generally speaking, they're very, very similar. So our US system, as you mentioned, you have time in those first 2 years to kind of discover things and explore a little bit. There are some degrees or some majors that make it a little more challenging. For example, if you want to be in engineering, you may have to start that out right away. Like you'll take the first class in your first year. Same thing with things like nursing, some of the prerequisites for business, but you can mix those in with your general education classes. And it isn't so much that, generally we do make our decision the first couple of years, and that's so we can spend the third and the fourth year in our major. But it doesn't mean that all those general education classes are necessarily finished in the first 2 years. I know in my experience, like my final semester of college, I did the fine arts distributive, the fine arts class that I'd forgotten to take in way back, as a first year student. And so I still had that one class to take during my final semester. So as long as you complete all the requirements, that's really what you need to do. But generally speaking, a lot of those general education or liberal arts requirements are finished in the first couple of years. And you're right, you're absolutely right. It helps you come to that decision as to what you want to major in, which then occupies your time for the next 2 years. The last bullet point on this page is program availability. That could really be number one, potentially, because what I'm speaking of there is, does the school even offer what you want? So wherever, depending on where you are in the decision-making process, you obviously want to know, and I have it listed here last only because you need to do some self-discovery first as to what your interests are before you can ever look to a college to see if they offer it, because you have to have some ideas first. But when you're looking at colleges, obviously one of the first things you want to identify is, do they have areas of interest or programs that I'm interested in? You may have it set in your mind that you want to go to a certain school. I hear from students all the time that say, well, I want to go to an Ivy League school. They don't necessarily know why they want to go to an Ivy League school, but it's just that they feel that they're supposed to. They haven't looked at the fact that only 8 to 15% of the applicants get into Ivy League schools, and they haven't necessarily looked at what those Ivy League schools offer as a major. I mean, do they have the ones they're interested in? So all that's part of that research and that discovery process that all students really need to go through. And the earlier you start that, the less stressful it will be your final year. So I recommend starting in your second year of high school, or definitely by your third year, so that your final year, you're not still searching, you're more narrowing the list down. So let's go on, just since we're talking about STEM today, this is just throws together a bunch of different terms. Now, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So it's a very broad topic, and you can see many of the potential majors there. Some of these, probably most of these, would be available at the undergraduate level, but there's a potential that some of them would be more challenging to find at the undergraduate level, and you might need to actually do it as a specialization at graduate. But there are things in there that you wouldn't necessarily think would be in there. Some people wouldn't think of actuarial science as being, even though it has science in the word, actuarial, they wouldn't necessarily think of it being a STEM program. But there's certainly a couple of areas of business that are. Obviously, all the normal sciences that you can think of, the psychologies, things like that, even construction and things like that, homeland security, those things are going to fall in the STEM majors. There is an official list. And the ones we'll look at here that I'll kind of just put up there all at one time. These are actually off the US government's approved STEM list. This isn't all of them. I just kind of handpicked some out off the list. But it does give you an idea of some of the potential majors that would fall under STEM. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the advantages to STEM is you do have the possibility of doing up to 3 years of optional practical training. So again, these are a few possible majors. Some of them are relatively difficult to find or relatively difficult to get into. Architecture is a good one. You don't find that at every school. And when you do find it, it can be very, very competitive to get into. Neuroscience is not up there right now, but neuroscience, we have that at Hope, and that's that's a relatively new major at the undergrad level. Probably in the last decade is when that some of the last 10 years that came down as an undergrad program. It used to be only available at the graduate level, and neuroscience is a combination of biology and psychology. So it's a study of the human mind. So for those students out there, if you have a little brother or little sister that really irritates you, you might want to study neuroscience to figure out maybe what's going on in that kid's mind, So it's a pretty hot career right now. Just like the one on this list, you see nanotechnology. That's a pretty hot one right now. So there's a lot of kind of hot majors. There's a lot of majors too that in the next 10 years, for example, now many of you, if you're students in high school now, that will be well past the time that you graduate even from college. But there's a lot of majors that we don't even know about yet that are going to come up. So there's always new majors being discovered. We're reaching a point where we do pull some down from the master's level and make them bachelor's degrees, like we did with neuroscience. But again, that's happening pretty frequently. So it's always a good thing to, as you're talking to your advisor, well, when you're doing your college search, obviously looking at the majors on the website of the college or the literature, if you have that. But then when you're at the college, really talking to your advisor about, hey, what are the possibilities? What are some new majors do you see anything new coming down in the next couple of years that I might be interested in? Because colleges do make changes, on an annual basis, depending on what the market is demanding of the students. So a few things to consider in what we've been talking about. Some majors are at the undergrad level are general, and further specialization happens at the graduate level. So a good example would be psychology, for example. You're probably going to do typically a psychology major at the undergrad level. But then you'll do some specialization in psychology. You might do social psychology, or you might go to a psychiatry school or something, or master's in psychology. So you're going to specialize at the graduate level. I think the more you get into STEM, though, STEM does have a lot of specialization at the undergrad level. So like at Hope, we have engineering, but we have 7 areas of engineering, 7 specializations. So again, kind of depends on the major as to how much detail you're getting at the undergrad level. I think also with a small private college, you're getting a lot of research that's associated with specialization. You're getting that research at the undergrad level that in many other schools you might not get till you're at the grad level. So I think liberal arts graduates, especially from schools with strong STEM programs, are going on to graduate programs, with a kind of an advantage because they've done some things that other graduates haven't been able to do. Yeah. In that same light, it's important to look for schools that have strong laboratory facilities. And for example, at Hope, we just got a grant this summer for a new mass spectrometer. So our students are doing research, in a mass spectrometer. In many schools, they would not do that till they were graduate students. So, we're looking at pre-med programs where you're able to actually work on a human cadaver in the biomedical sciences program. Some of those things, again, not available on every campus. Yeah. So depending on what your major is, looking to see what kind of facilities they have. And if you're not in a STEM field, but you're looking at other types of majors, then again, what kind of research are the faculty doing that you can be involved in, even if it's not a STEM major? Because there's research happening in every field. It's just a different type of research than you would find in a laboratory necessarily. Yeah. So again, is the college receiving National Science Foundation research funding that shows their commitment to that undergraduate research, or it could be graduate research? Hope is one of the leading recipients of NSF funds. for research. So, you know, it is a commitment that we've made to make sure that the students are not only educated in the classroom, but in the laboratory as well. One thing to ask is when can you, especially if you're in the STEM in particular, but when are you able to start doing research? When does this begin? Is it your first year, second year, third year, or do you have to wait till your fourth year? You know, we do research as soon as a student is ready to do research, and then we also do a summer research program where we have about 200 students who stay on campus to do research in the summer. So I think you want to look for those extra experiences and get a handle on, you know, what the possibilities might be for you as a student. And sometimes they won't know that till you get there, because they want to gauge your talent, right? And what you're ready for. But I think just knowing that those things are available to you is important. And I think also it's important to know with that research, are you doing it for faculty members? In other words, they're taking the credit for the research, or are you doing it with them? So you're presenting papers, you're presenting at conferences with the faculty members, your name's on the papers as well. And that's a bit of a difference. You can still put in your resume that you're engaged in research if you did it for a faculty member, but you could put it in your resume that you published research if you did it with the faculty member. So again, are they presenting or publishing? That's a good question. So that's a little bit about research. Now let's look at deciding where to study. So to bring it into perspective a little bit, so Hope College is where if you see my cursor, it's on the left side of Michigan, near Lake Michigan. So Michigan being in the northern part of the US and in the Midwest. Some would say it's in the east. We are kind of on the eastern side, but we're definitely not on the East Coast, which would be over here by Boston and Delaware, New Jersey. They're all on the East Coast. To give you a perspective on distance, though, some people, if you haven't been to the U.S., you may not have an idea of how vast and how large the U.S. is. But if from the point of where Hope College is over here on the west, we call it Michigan's West Coast. But we're down here, and if you were to drive just around the bottom of the lake to Chicago, it would take you 3 hours to get there in this short little distance. If I wanted to, at spring break, drive to Disney World with my friends in Florida, it would take me 24 hours to drive to Disney World from Grand Rapids. That's almost straight south, a little bit to the east. So, you know, I've had students say, oh, I'm looking at, you know, I encourage them to look at studying in Michigan. They say, well, it's pretty cold there. And I said, yeah, it can be cold in the winter. And I say, where else are you looking? And they said, well, the other place I'm looking is Boston. And I said, no, wait a minute. You know, Boston is almost directly, if not further north than we are, looking straight across. So geographically, sometimes students, I think, don't always comprehend kind of the distance or the geography or, you know, how the weather impacts different areas. But we are an all 4 season state. Right now it's in the middle of autumn or the fall, where it's cool weather, it's football weather. That's when we do the American football season, is in the fall. And the leaves will start to color, or will you know, change color and fall eventually. And then we will hit winter time. We might get occasional snow, you know, before the December holidays, but lately it hasn't been coming to really stay on the ground until late December, early January. So when you leave from the first semester of being in the US, by the time you come back, if you leave the country, some people will stay, but if you leave the country, by the time you come back, there very well should be snow on the ground in January. But anyway, deciding where to study. There's over 4,000 choices all over the US. Lots of good options in every state. Just kind of depends on what you're looking for. It's important to make that right choice, though. And how do you make the right choice? I think it's thinking about all these factors that we're talking about. But in this case, here's a few different general topics. Like, so do you look at a private or a public? Well, first of all, it's important to note there's really no difference. We have small and large privates. We have small and large publics. We have maybe, you know, more well-ranked privates, and we have lower-ranked privates, and the same thing with public. So, I mean, there's quality-wise, there's no difference. The only difference between a school being called a private or a public is that a public school gets a portion, and actually a pretty small portion, of its funding from the state where the school is located. Whereas the private school gets its funding from tuition dollars and donations. And yeah, basically those two things. There's some federal money that might be in there too, but generally speaking, private colleges are tuition-driven institutions. Really, public are as well to a degree, because they're only getting a small percentage of their funding from the state where they're located. So they're very similar. There's not a whole lot of difference. The public schools do tend to be bigger than the private. That's one difference you'll see. That's not a negative or a positive. That's for you to decide what you want. But privates will range maybe from 500 to maybe close to 10,000. There might be a few that are bigger than that, but I would say in the single-digit thousands. The more the private colleges are going to be in that the lower end of the thousands. Whereas public schools, that's where you're going to get into the major schools of 56,000 or 50,000 or whatever. So you're getting to public schools that have multiple branches of their campus, and they have many students. So just different setting, but like I say, not negative or positive, just something you have to decide what's right for you. So with that same discussion, then it's small or large. And there's medium as well too. I mean, everything in between, but between 500 or 600 would be about the smallest probably college you could find, all the way up to that 56, 58,000, which is the size of a decent sized, a small city anyway, small one, but small town, I guess would be better. Again, we have a saying in the US, and I don't know if this will translate well into Portuguese, but we have a saying that says, would you rather be a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond? So at a small school, you can be a small fish, but you tend to be a big fish in a small pond at a small school, because people know you, people know what you're good at. I mean, if you do something wrong, they know that too. But, people do know more about you at a small school just by virtue of it being smaller. Whereas at a large institution, it will take you a lot of effort. You can do it, but it will take you much more effort to be a big fish at a big school, because there are many students trying to be big fishes at the school. So there are many students trying to do the same thing and to be noticed. And so it can be more of a challenge, but students that are very proactive and very aggressive and very extroverted can usually succeed in doing that. I mean, there's plenty of international students who go to big schools, so and they're doing fine.
And with that, like also the class setting, like a number of students per class, that also makes a lot of difference. Like I think in my liberal arts college, also when my biggest class, I think there was like maybe 60 students, maybe. And I know that's even a small class for a public school, because public schools, they tend to have 200 in a classroom. The class setting changes a lot. And I know for us here, at least in Brazil, our classes are small throughout the whole middle school, high school. Like we have like classes with like 40 students tops. And we graduate with those 40 students. It's a different setting. But I found that very similar to small private colleges in the US. They have the same type of setting in classrooms. Of course, they don't carry out the same students each class you go, because people, again, have the choice of what class they want to take. Here in Brazil, we don't have the choice, so we stick with the 40 students all classes long. But in the US, at least it's the small private schools, they offer you that chance to have smaller class settings where you are more connected to the teacher or the professor, where like you feel maybe more comfortable asking questions, and in a smaller setting than if you were in a class with 400 students. I don't know, there's less personal interaction with the professor, even to ask questions after class. The class time, the office hours are very limited and all that stuff. So
and that's a good point. Not only is it, the secondary education was different, the structure was different than the US, but you're absolutely right. At the college level, the class size can be very small. I mean, the average at Hope is 14 with an 11-to-1 student teacher ratio. So, you're going to get to know your faculty. They're going to get to know you. They're going to be concerned if you're not in class. I think smaller colleges tend to require you to be in class, whereas large universities, not always. Maybe once you get into your major, it becomes more of a necessity, because the classes are then smaller when you get up in the major. But attendance policies do vary from school to school. At private colleges, they do tend to expect you to be there. Class participation is part of your grade normally. And that's different than, you know, some systems, and I'm not sure about Brazil, but in the university, you know, like in Asia, some of the universities, you pretty much go to class, you listen to the lecture, and you leave. There's not any interaction. You're supposed to take your notes, and there's no office hours. Like, you know, you mentioned, Fernanda, that our faculty have office hours. They have time outside of class where you can go and ask questions, receive some extra help, receive a little bit more understanding. Maybe you struggled with something that had to do with that lecture, and you just needed to be re-explained again, and they're very good about that. So yes, small and large can certainly affect the bigger picture of the total university, but also the class size. Co-ed single-sex facilities or institutions, we still do have single-sex institutions in the U.S. There's not very many of them, but there still are. So if a student would want to be in an all-male or an all-female institution, they can certainly search for that, and they will find options across the U.S. The majority of them, however, are co-ed. And then within the university itself, then there will again be single-sex facilities or co-ed dormitories. And when I say co-ed, they're co-ed not that you're living with the opposite sex in the same room, but that the suite, you would have suite mates of the same sex or a roommate of the same sex. And then the floor or the wing of the building would be, this one's all male, that's all female, or this floor and that floor are all male or female. So you might be in the same building with them. If you're in a building, a traditional style dormitory where it's a community bathroom down the hall, then that bathroom is for the men or the women on that wing. And then there is, if you have if a male is visiting a female dormitory, which does happen on occasion, because they have friends there, there is a male bathroom for the male. Like in the lobby, there will be a bathroom. So, you know, I mean, so facilities are there for everybody, but we do want the male or female that want to be in a single sex facility, that is available to them. And also I want to mention the research versus liberal arts. Please keep in mind that because a school, just because it calls itself a research institution, that doesn't mean the other schools don't do research. It just means that if a school is a Research 1 institution, that Research 1 designation, if you ever see schools say we're a Research 1, that they're getting that because of the graduate school research, not because of undergrad research. That's based on the amount of research that's being done at the graduate level. So a liberal arts institution, especially if they have STEM programs, probably has a good amount of research happening. So you want to look at, as we mentioned earlier, the amount of research money they're getting, and the amount of research time they're putting into research in the summer, and the research experiences that our students are getting, and you can get a handle on whether that's an important aspect of that campus or not. So liberal arts colleges in the U.S., this is a little bit blurry, I apologize for that, but it does give you an idea of the numbers of liberal arts colleges and where they're all located. And you can see that the eastern half of the U.S., especially the East Coast, has the vast majority of the liberal arts colleges in the U.S. California does have a good number. Texas and Washington State do have, they all have a good number as well. But the majority of them happen to be, and whether that's because that's kind of where the U.S. started historically, and some of the oldest colleges in the country are liberal arts colleges, and you know, we were founded on the east side of our country, and people migrated west. And I think probably that's why a lot of the colleges that's kind of how they're situated in the U.S., but lots and lots of options. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about the cost, the variations of cost, and this is where we can kind of see that play out a little bit. So our secondary school is 4 years. It's 9th through 12th grade in the U.S., and then you have the option of you could go right to work, but I think more and more kids are realizing that they can get a better job and make more money if they do have a degree. So I think we continue in the U.S. of trying to promote students who it's suited for them to go to college or community college. Some, they're better off going right into a trade, and that's fine too. But for those that want to go into college, you've got community college option, which is the first 2 years of education. You will take almost the exact same curriculum, if not in many cases the same curriculum, as somebody that goes to a 4-year college that they will take in their first 2 years. And then at that point, the person that's at the college, the four-year college, will just continue, obviously, and finish their bachelor's degree of 4 years. The person at the community college at any point could transfer to the four-year institution and finish up. But if they want to finish the program at the community college, that would be an associate's degree, and it's granted after 2 years. In many states in the US, the community colleges have a very good transfer program with the four-year institution. So especially the state schools. So if you, because community colleges are also, for the most part, in most states, those are state institutions as well. And so there's very good transfer programs. So in many states, you finish that 2-year degree and your general education are automatically completed for the four-year school. So you want to check into, if you decide to go the community college route, you want to check into which four-year schools do they have partnerships with, do they have transfer agreements with. And for many of them, I know here in Michigan, you can go to, our local community college here in the west side of Michigan, and you can say, I want to be, I want to go to Michigan State University and I want to be a biology major. And they will tell you exactly what to take for your first 2 years at the community college so that everything transfers. So the system is in place, and you can save some money because community college tuition is cheaper than even public institutions. Private tends to be the most expensive. Public is the second, public 4-year, and then community college is less expensive. However, even the privates try to give scholarship to try to bring that cost down so it's more affordable and make it more equal to a public university. But you can make that decision as to which way you want to go. But I also want to mention with community college, one maybe disadvantage that you might see or your parents might see, most community colleges do not have residential facilities. So there are some that do. I know some in Texas and California that do, but most of them do not. And so you'd be living in the community. Some students are mature enough to do that. But at 18 or 19, but some are not, and some parents would not want them necessarily doing that. So that is something to consider if you're looking at community or junior college. And that's a good point. That could be called a community college or a junior college, depending on the state where it's located and how they decided to name the school. But they're the same thing.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because a lot of people think like, oh yeah, I'll go to a community college because it is cheaper. Like their tuition is very cheap, but because they also don't offer you, most of them, of course, don't offer you the housing. So that's why it's also cheaper, because you're not paying for housing. So that doesn't mean you're not going to have that cost, because you will, and you need to take that into consideration. It just won't be in the community college itself. You will have to be, like you said, in the actual city where it's located. So people do have to take into consideration those costs. I don't know if they offer meal plans. I don't know if that's something, that's actually a question. I don't know if they actually offer.
Typically not, unless they have the residential facilities. They might allow you to put money on your card so you don't have to carry cash. But I don't know that they would necessarily have meal plans. They might. They do if they have residential facilities, but I don't know if they don't. I think it's just a cafeteria type situation. You pay as you go. But generally, the food is pretty good, especially if the school has a culinary program. If they have if they have a cooking program at the community college, you're going to get some real opportunities to have some really good food, because they're trying all kinds of different things there. So that's kind of cool. But so that's kind of some options, a couple of options. Then, of course, moving on through the 4 years, then whether you went to 2-year to 4-year or just straight to 4-year, then you got the master's and doctorate after that. So what some students don't realize is the length of time that some careers take in the U.S. So a good example is medical school. To be a doctor in the U.S., you're really talking about those first 4 years, then another 4 years of medical school, then specialization. So you're really talking somewhere between 10 to 12 years of education to become a doctor, whereas some countries you can go right to medical school out of high school. And then you have some kind of a residency there as well. But some of our programs take quite a bit longer. Some of the programs you can move right from the bachelor's to the doctorate, and that would be, for example, physical therapy in the U.S. Physical therapy is a doctorate program now, but you do move right from the bachelor's degree. Medical school is another example. You're moving right from a bachelor's to a doctorate. You're skipping kind of the master's level. And then, but there's other things like Like psychology, you'd probably go right on to a master's first, and then you could decide whether you wanted a doctorate. Business is going to be an MBA, and only for specific reasons would you end up getting a doctorate in business. So it just kind of depends on the field, but bachelor's to master's to doctorate is a normal kind of route. So kind of rehashing a little bit about what we talked about, but some of the decision factors on the left. So we talked about academics, we talked about location, we talked about size, public, private, the campus culture we kind of made reference to, and Fernanda, you did that as well. And what does it feel like on campus? And so that's something that is hard to judge when you're not there and you can't visit. But if you can make connections with current students, especially maybe from your country or from your region of the world, that can be helpful. Some of the videos that are on YouTube that the universities have, that can give you an idea of the culture as well. Admission selectivity is another one that is kind of part of your matching as you go through your decision making. I mean, is it realistic for you to apply to an Ivy League school? If that's what you've been thinking of doing, is it realistic? If you're a 3.0 student, it's probably not realistic. And I don't want to burst any bubbles or ruin any dreams, but when a school has 8 to 15%, depending on the school, acceptance rate, you know that every one of those students is a top-notch student. And when they're only admitted 15% of them. So it's not to say you can't have a dream school. You do need to have a dream school. You need, but be realistic about it in your selecting that dream school. So you should always have at least one that is kind of a dream school, or this is where you really want to go if you get in, and then a couple that are backup schools that you would really be happy with. Maybe they're not at the same levels at dream school, but they're good schools. And then maybe two more, at least one, if not two more, that are your backup schools, that if you don't get into any of those three or can't afford those three, you know you can get into and you can afford that last option. And that last option is not a bad school. It's just not your first choice for whatever reason. And that's okay. The school won't know that they were your fourth choice when you arrive. They're just happy that you're there. The important thing is that you're happy with it and that you want to be there and you want to be successful at that school. And then obviously affordability is part of that fact, those factors as well. Is what can you realistically afford? What is the total cost minus how much scholarship can they offer? That leaves you whatever amount of money. That's what you're gonna have to pay per year. Typically, scholarships do not increase per year. Typically, they stay the same. So you need to account for the fact that if the first year your contribution was $20,000, your second year it's probably going to be $21,000. Your third year is probably going to be $22,000 because everything goes up. And it's good to ask that question as to how much will your costs go up each year, you know, on average. And on average, I would say it's about 3%. Some it's more, some it's less, but I would say it's about 3%. We talked about weather. We talked about, we didn't really talk about location, a little bit about location, but it's not so much even just the location in the US. That's one factor. But also then even within the state, if you decided you wanted to be in Michigan, do you want to be in a school that's more in the city, in a suburb, or in a small town? Because we have all three. And every state does. So you need to decide what's important to you. I like, you know, one thing when I came to work at Hope College that I really liked about it is it's a beautiful downtown area of Holland, Michigan, which is kind of a tourist town, very much a tourist town. And so it's a 4-block downtown. It's not a big downtown. There's about 33,000 people there. But it's a beautiful, well-kept downtown because of the tourism industry. And even in the winter, the sidewalks are heated, so you don't get ice buildup in the winter, you know, which is kind of a unique factor that not every town has. But we're literally right next to downtown, and so students walk just 1 block over, and they're downtown. I think you have that nice small atmosphere, small campus of about 3,000. But you're only 45 minutes from Grand Rapids, which is the second largest city in Michigan. So the concerts, the semi-pro sports, lots more restaurants. We have a lot in Holland, but a lot more in Grand Rapids. So different things to do there. And then you're a 3-hour train ride, and we do have a train station that's just walking distance from campus for a three-hour train ride to Chicago. So students will very often go to Chicago just for the night, get a bunch of friends together, get a hotel room, and they explore Chicago for 24 hours, and then they come back on the train. So that way they're not dealing with parking and driving in the city and all that stuff. So it's very, very convenient to be in a small town, but have access to a medium-sized city and in a very large city as well. Using your resources, I think we'll kind of breeze through this real quickly because these are kind of going to be kind of obvious, but use your college counselor if you have one that is, you know, if you have somebody at your high school that does college counseling. There's also an Education USA office in every major city, most major cities in the US. There's over 420 of these offices around the world, and they do unbiased advising on studying in the US. So if you can connect with your local Education USA office, they would be happy to help you with a lot of general information. There's a ton of websites out there that help with college searches. What I recommend though is you never pay for information. All the information that you can get online, you can get for free yourself. So friends that have gone before you or that have graduated from the US, they can all be helpful. Printed guidebooks and rankings, just really be careful with these because they are produced for the purpose of selling the book. They're not produced for really any other reason. If they didn't sell, they would stop making them and there'd be no more rankings. So we do not have national rankings in the US. There are only publications that do ranking. And so it's important to look at the details about the colleges as you look at different rankings and, you know, the graduation rate, the amount of research they're doing. It's important to look at other publications too, like Colleges That Change Lives, which Hope is a part of. There's only 45 schools in the country that are part of Colleges That Change Lives. And they're looking at that publication, looked at many, many more colleges, many hundreds and hundreds of colleges, and looked at, you know, what colleges are really making a difference to their students and how is it affecting their future. And so we're really happy to be a part of that particular publication. When things settle down with COVID, hopefully you'll get back to being able to college fairs and meet U.S. representatives. Right now you get to meet them virtually, but however you do it, that can be very helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
So here's, again, not going to spend a lot of time, but just to tell you that these are the general list of things that will be required when you apply. The first two will be required by everybody, the application, the transcript. And then the last one will also be required. I'm sorry, not the last one. One that's not on there, which is verification of financial support. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that's always required of international students as well. But besides the academic transcript and the application, the other one that would always be required, unless you're from an English-speaking country, you'll have to show that you have English proficiency. So, you know, that you've taken the TOEFL or the IELTS or the Duolingo test, or that you are educated totally in English, or you're from a country where English is the first language. Standardized test in terms of the ACT or SAT. Some normally would require those, but right now it's a smaller number because of COVID and the inability to take those tests. So some schools have gone test optional. Hope is already test optional for international anyway, but we are for US students as well right now. But again, that could change even next year. I don't know. We'll see how many maintain the test optional status after COVID. Letters of recommendation sometimes are required, sometimes are not. Statement of purpose, depending on the application that the school uses, that sometimes is an automatic part of it. Sometimes it's optional. And then a CV, a curriculum vitae, or a resume. That you might be, if you have a lot of activities, you might throw a resume in there. Otherwise, it's normally something that graduate students do because the application itself will give you ample room to list your activities. You don't need to submit another document that gives all the same information. It's important that we're getting authentic documents. I shouldn't really have to say that, but unfortunately, sometimes we get fake documents. Many times we can tell whether it's fake or not. And I don't need to go into how we know that, but many times we can tell. So if it's discovered that you've submitted fake documents, whether they're academic documents or financial documents or test scores, or that you've plagiarized your essay, you've taken the essay off the internet and just submitted it as your own, which again, sometimes we can tell. There's a place where you can actually check essays online for plagiarism. So if we suspect something, we're going to check it out. But if you're just discovered that you've submitted something that's not authentic, depending on what it was, the college might give you an opportunity to correct that situation, or they may simply deny your application because you're not truthful. It just depends on, I think, what it was, what the document was, and what was submitted. But in general, just you don't have to worry about that because you're going to submit all authentic documents. And so we don't even need to worry about that. What's the timeline? So there's 3 possible timelines. Rolling admission just means that as you apply and as the files complete, they make a decision. So the decisions roll right along all throughout the year. Early action is something we happen to be doing right now at Hope, and that's anybody that applies by November 1, they have a decision all at the same time. The first round of decisions go out the 3rd week in November, and that's early action. Early decision is something different. It's not something that I generally recommend, but there are some of the elite schools especially do offer early decision. And the advantage is if you know that's where you want to go, and you know that if, that no matter what, that's where you're going, then I think early decision is a great option. But if you're not sure where you're going to go, you should not be applying early decision, because early decision is a binding decision. So if you apply early decision and they admit you early decision, you're supposed to withdraw all other applications and say, okay, I'm going, that's where I'm going. So that's why it's important that you only apply early decision if you know that if you get in, you're going there. So that means academically, financially, you know that it's all going to work out. So it is a binding decision. Yeah.
So when you apply, you said November, right? So when, let's say I apply for the early decision, it's just for the next fall, for the following fall, right? Is that when they actually start?
Yeah, early decision, early action are 2 different things. So early action, there is a deadline date, and then admissions are just all released at the same time. Early decision is the same thing. The date might vary, but there is a date when everything has to be in by, and it's usually there's no, with early decision, there's no budging on that date. I mean, that is a set date. You can't say, well, can I get it in a week later? No, we passed the deadline. Early action, the difference between that and early action, yes, if you apply by November 1, you get a decision by November, the 3rd week in November. But then if you miss that you just apply for rolling admission, anytime after that. Early decision, there's that deadline, and then they're going to do all the early decisions again at one time, but they're binding. So yes, we are applying for the fall semester when you apply early decision. Normally they don't. Some schools don't even offer admission in January. If they do, it's normally rolling admission. There's just a deadline by which everything has to be in. So for Hope, we don't have that many start in January, but we do have a few. And so October 15th, which is coming up here pretty quickly, October 15th is a deadline for January. But there's no early action or early decision process for January. It's just kind of regular rolling admission.
Okay.
So there's also non-competitive versus competitive admission that is kind of all part of this process. So a good example of a non-competitive would be a community college, which is traditionally non-competitive. Sometimes they only require that you graduated from high school. Sometimes they do require a very minimum GPA from high school, but it's really pretty low normally, all the way up to the Ivy Leagues, which are really actually highly competitive, not just competitive, but highly competitive. So there's schools all in the range of, I would say a lot of the schools are in that competitive to very competitive range, especially private schools. Whereas then you've got that grouping that's at the bottom and the top, the community college and the highly competitive Ivy Leagues. But the majority of us fall in the middle. And with varying minimums depending on the school. We're at about a 3.0 minimum. Many of the private schools in Michigan, a lot of them are at 3.0 minimum. Even a lot of the publics are as well. 3.0 is kind of that threshold where it's, if you're above a 3.0, you probably have a pretty good chance of getting in, unless it's a highly competitive school. So we kind of just talked about these 3 and how schools will fall into that category, and the percentage, the number of admissions, we're going to admit at Hope 70% of our students probably. But we don't get a lot of students that apply that aren't admissible. 30% aren't admissible. But I think generally if students are doing their research, they kind of know what the schools are looking for. So they self-select themselves out in the beginning. I would say very few of my international students are not admissible. Because it's part of the communication process with them from the beginning. If they start asking questions, I say, this is what we're looking for. So they'll not apply if they don't have it, basically. So once you've been admitted, then, so this particular one varies by institution. Most U.S. institutions will require verification of financial support as part of the admissions process.
Yeah.
At Hope, it still is part of the admissions process, but I will do an admission letter and a partial scholarship decision before I require this. So you'll submit everything except for financial. I will say, you're admitted. I'm going to offer you a $20,000 scholarship. This is the balance of the first year. This is what you need to show financial support. So the difference there is, for most schools, you have to show the full year's worth of support in the bank right on the front end. Whereas we're doing it, we're saying, wait, this is really how much you're going to have to pay, and this is all you have to show, rather than the whole amount. So I think it's better for the families. I mean, Hope College it's going to be for next year, let's say approximately $52,000, and we can give up to $25,000 in scholarship. So what's easier to show, $52,000 in the bank or $25,000 to $30,000?
Yeah.
Neither one is easy. I get that. Neither one is easy, but it's easier to show if you got 25 to 30,000 rather than 52. So plus it's more realistic. This is really what you're going to pay, not the bigger amount. Even the U.S. students don't typically pay that full amount. They get financial aid as well. So you'll have an enrollment deposit, you have a housing deposit, housing paperwork, and ultimately the visa interview. So that's all stuff that happens kind of at the end, maybe in the summer, maybe from, May until August. And then obviously when you get to the school, then you've got orientation. We do a 1-week orientation. We actually do a parent orientation too. So for many of our students, one of the parents decides to come as well, and we do an orientation. We host them for a week as well. So it allows them to really get a grasp on what we do here at Hope College for their students. So cost and affordability. What's the annual cost, the total annual cost, not just tuition? What's the total annual cost? And then what's your family's ability to pay? That's an important thing to discuss with your family. And then does the school offer scholarship or grant? Is it all academic? Is there any need-based aid? Need-based aid is pretty rare, but it does exist with some schools. And then are there jobs available on campus? But keeping in mind that having a job on campus, you're not going to be able to pay down your tuition with that job. You're typically, as an international student, you can work up to 20 hours a week on campus. You don't need extra permission to do that. You can just work 20 hours on campus. And when there's vacation times, you can work up to 40 hours a week on campus. So during the summer, if you decided to stay rather than going home, you could work the whole summer on campus. Now, during the summertime, you could potentially save some money that would help you toward the next year's fees. But during the school year, you're never going to be able to make enough money to really apply much to your any debts you have to the college or anything you still owe. It's really intended for you to have spending money. You want to go buy a pair of jeans. You want to go out to eat. You want to take the train to Chicago. You want to split a room with a bunch of friends. That gives you some spending money to do that. But that's really what the jobs on campus do. As I just put down at the bottom, there's so many choices, but it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time once you recognize how much a school costs, how much they can offer. If it's beyond your reach, unless you feel that there's going to be some other scholarships or other types of sponsorships that come your way, it doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time on schools that are just simply beyond your reach, even though you would love to be there. And so that I know that's challenging, but that's what I recommend. So what types of aid are there? So the academic aid, that's usually based on transcript and test scores. There could be need-based aid. Again, it's pretty rare, but because it's difficult for a U.S. school to really gauge how much your family really has and how much is available to you. It's much, in the U.S., we have a system in place where tax forms have to be submitted and everything. And so for the U.S. students, it's easier to judge that. So again, that's pretty rare, but there's some out there. Athletic aid, athletic scholarships. If the school is Division I, II, or in an independent, which is NAIA, that's an independent school, then they do have scholarships available if they have that particular sport. But they are very limited and they're highly competitive to get. So you almost have to be a regional or national athlete in your country to be, or a state level athlete if you have states within your country, then you have to be able to maybe match what's needed at the college level in the US. So there's nothing wrong with, if you're at that level, there's nothing wrong with putting together an athletic resume and sending it to the coach to see if they might be interested. Even schools like Hope, that's Division III, our athletics are extremely high level, and we've spent a lot of money on the facilities. They're beautiful facilities. And so we are an academic institution, but we do have strong athletics. And so but Division III, we cannot offer scholarships. So we will often get athletes, especially in soccer, that happens to be one, or as you all would call it, football. That happens to be one sport where it's extremely difficult to make our team at Hope. We attract soccer players from around the world, and they recruit them very early. And some of these kids have gotten scholarship offers elsewhere, but they choose to come to Hope because of the level of academics and athletics combined are much more attractive in some cases. There's also non-academic merit-based aid, so things like dance, music, theater, and art. And we happen to give up to $2,000 in performance aid based on an audition. And you don't have to major in that. You just have to have the talent, but you don't have to major in it. So we have most of our students that are participating in the fine arts are actually not majoring in the fine arts. They're majoring in other things, and they're only continuing with the fine arts because they love to. They're violin players, they're piano players, whatever they are, or they're theater, or they're singers, but they want to keep doing that. We're one of the only schools, one of the few schools that has accreditation in every one of the arts. Some schools may have one or the other, or a couple of them. We have all accreditation in all four. And and our dance program is attractive to people because they get proficient in 4 different areas of dance. It isn't just one. We're going to expose you to 4 different areas. And again, auditions are required, and those are typically need to be done by January. So that's kind of a deadline that we have for fine arts auditions. And every school has their own kind of deadlines, processes. So that's kind of what we got for that presentation. It's we talked for well over an hour. I hope that was okay.
No, yeah, that's perfectly fine. All this information is really good, Jim. Like, it's really good because I feel like people don't know about this. Like, they don't know the process. They don't know how to do things, or even like seeing that there are opportunities out there. I feel like it will guide students now. They're here thinking about what they want to do. In that preparation state that we talked about during the presentation, there are students currently in that preparation state where they have time to think and where they want to go, what they want to study. And having someone to guide and information, I feel like that's the best way for them at that stage, right? Right.
Yeah, definitely. And so, working with the resources that the student has, obviously at their local level, including Education USA, including independent, sometimes they work with independent educational agents, and that's okay. If they want to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you're working with an ethical agent, one that's not charging you, too much money. Because they can be a great help, but you just want to make sure that it's reasonable and that they are providing what they say. One thing I would say, avoiding about any kind of service that might be out there, if they're guaranteeing anything, then I would question their ethics, because they can't guarantee admission, they can't guarantee scholarships, and they can't guarantee you test results. These things are up, either their admissions and scholarship. These are our decisions at the college level. We're the one that control that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
My contact information is up there. I'm going to go ahead and take it off share, but if you want to reach out, if anybody wants to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to. You can reach out to Fernanda, and she can connect you with me as well. I'm more than happy to answer any basic questions. And take advantage of virtual fairs that are happening now. If you hear of a virtual fair, register for it, hop on, and just check out some of the colleges. I mean, there's a lot of different choices. A lot of good information can be had on the virtual fairs. And then, of course, once we're able to get back there, see people in person as well. Good. Well, is there anything else that you have, Fernanda? Any other questions that I can help you as we close this up?
I was, it wasn't like really questions, just because you answered it so clearly. And I feel like at those, like, there's not specific questions right now, but I feel like as people go through the process, they might have questions when they reach specific processes. And as soon as they have some feedback from people, I will send them to you to ask, even if they want to ask specific questions about Hope itself, because you're the best person to talk to about that, about the college and how we can best supply the student needs and what the student wants. And pursues or want to pursue in like a career wise.
Sure.
But I really do appreciate all your time that you took. And I know you're willing to do other presentations, which is awesome, because I feel like information is the best way now to, at least us here in Brazil that are limited in information from other countries, because there are so many barriers, like language barriers and, you know, just people thinking it's impossible to even talk to a recruiter. And you know, my job here is to show that really I brought a recruiter here. You can talk to him, you know, just how to kind of connect the two countries and make people see that that's actually an option for them. Like even, you know, if they want to plan for that. But I really do appreciate your time, Jim. And thank you for your willingness always to help. And I really do appreciate. Thank you for coming today.
Not a problem. And I'm certainly open for future types of meetings. And even if you have a group that says, hey, I'd like to interact and ask questions and just do a little banter back and forth. We can do a live event too at some point through Zoom or Facebook Live or whatever works out. One thing I didn't mention, and I should have, because in Brazil, this sometimes is not a concern, but something that they need to deal with. And you mentioned language. And so we didn't really talk about that, but there's the whole English language aspect too. And so if students do need that, there are plenty. Some schools offer their own English language programs. And then there's also private English language programs that could be a possibility that you could go to, and then they can transfer you out to a public, you know, to another college or university. So I'm glad you're doing, you know, some subtitles and some translating for this presentation, and I think that will help the students as well. And if we do a presentation in the future, you know, we can go back and forth with each other with you translating things if it's a live event too. So whatever, I just won't talk as fast or as long if you have to do that.
No, for sure. And I appreciate, because I also see as a time for people to practice their listening, because it is, you know, in a lecture hall, it might be just as fast as you talk, and people gotta have to listen to it, right? So I do appreciate, Jim, so much. And I will reach out to you soon for us to maybe plan a different event, but I do appreciate your time. And
no problem. Keep doing the good work, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon, Jim. Thank you so much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.